Is resistance history on the side of Chicago's mayor in his fight against Trump? Particularly when it comes to the executive order the mayor just issued barring the Chicago Police Department from helping federal authorities with civil immigration enforcement or any related patrols, traffic stops, and checkpoints? Well, yeah. Hey folks, I'm Todd Sturmer. I'm an American scholar of resistance history and the author of the forthcoming A Resistance History of the United States. Turns out that Mayor Johnson is in some pretty good historical company in defying Trump. Cast your mind about 180 years ago to the 1840s, when more and more white Americans were coming to recognize what black Americans had known all along, that the Constitution didn't do what community leaders said that it did every 4th of July. It didn't spread freedom across the globe. It spread American slavery across the continent, and was using the tools of the ethno-nationalist state the founders had created to do that, and in exactly the way that those founders had intended. So by the time of the Mexican War, 9 of the first 11 presidents were enslavers. The only ones who weren't were both named Adams, and each of them only lasted one term. Even Van Buren from New York had claimed to own at least one man. He later freed him, but 1 or 100 still an enslaver. And Congress wasn't helping either. As slavery expanded into the Southwest and West, so did the powers of enslavers in Congress through the 3/5 Clause. But when the United States Army was deployed to invade another country, Mexico, to protect, even expand the rights of enslavers, comfortable white Americans started to perk up. Send our sons to do what? Send our money to do what? It's the kind of thing that sent people like John Brown and Henry David Thoreau over the edge into an understanding that resisting the abusive authority of the American state in the service of slavery was never going to succeed within the permitted channels that American political culture laid out. And moderates like Abraham Lincoln convinced them that their political party, the Whigs, was no longer up to the job of opposing the enslavers. Many of them suddenly threw off the patriotic speeches and Bancroft's history of the United States to wake up and realize that the United States had been created as a white nationalist country and was operating in exactly that way. So they would have to find another way to change its direction. Now for some, like Lincoln, that meant a new political party, the Republicans. For others who had enough of expecting establishment politics to change anything, they leaned into the existing Underground Railroad, just this extraordinary clandestine defiance network built by black Americans who had known the score since Washington took his first oath of office. They knew they needed to target slavery at its root, helping enslaved people sabotage the enslaver system one heartbeat at a time, with a useful boost from this thing called Canada. Now, finally, white people were seeing all that too. In response to the success of the Underground Railroad, the enslavers used their favorite tool, the United States government, the United States Congress, and passed a tough Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. It was a striking expansion of federal authority designed to compel the return of people who had escaped from slavery. It denied alleged fugitives the right to a jury trial or the right to testify on their own behalf to dispute an enslaver's claim over them. And pay attention to this, it created a new federal force, these commissioners, using federal marshals empowered to find and recover free black people. They were paid $10 for every person they sent back into slavery, incentivizing brutality. I wonder if they wore masks too. And it required law enforcement officials and private citizens in free states to help the federal government capture alleged fugitives. In fact, they made you a criminal if you refused to. In essence, every American after 1850 worked for the enslavers, or else. But northern states weren't having it. A number of them passed what became known as personal liberty laws. And this is where Mayor Johnson's order comes in. Passed in one form or another in most northern states, the personal liberty laws forbade the use of state and local jails to detain alleged fugitives, prohibited state officials like police and judges from participating in the capture or return of alleged fugitives, guaranteed constitutional rights denied by the federal act, such as trial by jury, habeas corpus, and then imposed criminal penalties of their own on anyone who wrongfully seized a free black person. It was the essence of an important resistance principle laid out by Thoreau. It all begins with a refusal of abusive authority. They said, no, it stops here, we refuse, and not only will we not cooperate, we will act too. Each personal liberty law was a small battle in the real American Revolution, and a direct historical precedent for Mayor Johnson's executive order. Now, you might be asking, did they work? What happened? Well, yeah, and in the way that resistance matters most. Refusal makes the exercise of abusive authority difficult, costly, complicated. Refusal makes things slow down. The authority has to change gears or push harder. At any rate, it makes them rethink what they're doing. The personal liberty laws did what they were designed to do, making enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act extremely difficult and sometimes impossible in the North. They created legal and logistical nightmares at every turn, which infuriated enslavers and their federal government, which is always, by the way, a terrific byproduct of effective resistance. Drive them nuts because it distracts them and makes them swing wildly. But guess what the Supreme Court said about them? You won't be surprised by this. If you're following the court today, none of this is going to be new to you because that court is the direct ancestor of this court. So the Supreme Court in Ableman versus Booth in 1859, under Chief Justice Roger Taney, yes, the author of the Dred Scott decision, declared Wisconsin's personal liberty law unconstitutional, ruling unanimously that state courts had no authority to interfere with the enforcement of federal law. What did the states do? Well, they took a page from the Trump playbook. You ignore the court if you don't like the opinion, because it can't actually enforce its own orders. So fine, two can play that game. So the states ignored the court and just moved on with their resistance. The key is that this was not like what's happening with Trump's deployment of troops. It was not a battle of words. It was not a war fought behind podiums. This involved people on the ground at the point of action, and the personal liberty laws drew a clear moral line. But, as you know, if you pay attention to the past, history's not there to make you feel good. The story does not have a happy ending. But that doesn't mean that it's not a necessary ending. The fight over the personal liberty laws showed many Americans that white people were finally in the fight against the enslavers' regime. It helped draw the clear lines over not only what the resistance was against, the abusive authority of enslaver power, but also what it was for. And it helped the Underground Railroad kick into high gear. Historians have estimated that as many as 10,000 enslaved people were restored to freedom through it in the 1850s alone. And it started to push the enslavers into a corner to protect the government that had been created for them. And from there we get to Fort Sumter. So, does it end well? No. But is what Johnson doing important? Yeah. And it's also against a white nationalist regime. Some would say the same white nationalist regime. But a resistance needs to know that people are willing to act, not just talk. Words can be, and almost always are, ignored by abusive authority, especially authoritarians like this bunch, whose own words almost always lie. So what do they care about what anybody else says? They deal in action, starting with crude bullying and then moving to direct coercion. We seem to be in the transition of one to the other. But that's Mayor Johnson's historical tradition. It's important to note that it's an American tradition. More than a flag or a hat or punching down on someone or some country. It's about standing up for lives and liberty against tough odds without being sure of the outcome, but because it's the right thing to do. And it's also our resistance history. One last point. This would not be a Tad Sturmer post if I didn't say something like this. What Trump is doing, of course, is an abuse of federal law, twisting statutes like the Insurrection Act to serve his politics, but it is in no way unconstitutional. The Constitution was written for precisely this purpose, to allow exactly this. A federal army strong enough to march into the states against their own citizens. Christopher Shays is everywhere. Madison wanted that power and he got it. Don't like it? Change the Constitution. Make it unconstitutional. It's okay, plenty of Americans, the Anti-Federalists, Samuel Adams, Mercy Otis Warren, they hated it too. They thought it was wrong too. They fought tooth and nail to try to strip that language out of the Constitution, and they failed. All they got was the Bill of Rights, and that's part of our resistance history too. If you want to talk about this more beyond our comment section, join us on Substack for some sharp essays and on Patreon for deeper and more informal dives. Allons-y.